Hello again. Please do not forget to follow our hashtag FrontRunners2022 and to send your questions under the streaming of each speaker. We will now pass to our final session of the day. Please welcome the Chief Arsenal reporter for Football London, part of Reach plc, the UK's biggest sports publisher, Mr. Chris Wheatley. He will speak on the subject journalism and social media.
So from the age of 13, 14 years old, I started my own Arsenal blog. A lot of visitors came to my blog, and that's when I realized, I think this is the job I want to do. That is when I realized I wanted to become a journalist. It took me a long time. I wrote for The Independent, for The Mirror. Then I went to university, I studied journalism, and I got a job at Eurosport. My old colleague contacted me. He said, "We've got this job. I think you would love it. It's Arsenal correspondent for goal.com." I accepted the job. Being at Goal was amazing. I went to the World Cup. I went to the Euro 2016 in France, and I got to travel with Arsenal to Madrid, Milan, Moscow. I started a company in 2019, a social media agency with Mesut Ozil and his agent. So I was working with Mesut, which was really cool. Eventually I decided I wanted to come back into journalism, and last summer I started at Football London, and it's a really, really nice place to work.
Well, it appears this proposal of a European Super League, which poses an existential threat to football as we know it, is going ahead.
European football clubs announce new Super League competition. It says 12 of Europe's leading football clubs have today come together to announce they have agreed to establish a new midweek competition, the Super League. Arsenal, Atletico Madrid, Chelsea, Barcelona, Inter Milan, Juventus, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, Real Madrid and Tottenham Hotspur have all joined as founding clubs.
Roy, what would you add to that?
Totally agree with it. Well, the last few lines you've mentioned there, I think it comes down to money, greed. Obviously we've heard nothing from FIFA yet, but it doesn't sound good.
Amazingly, we all know that clubs is an investment, it's a business at the end of the day, but what happens to the fans? What happens to the memories of what the fans have had over the years?
I'm disgusted, absolutely disgusted. I'm disgusted with Manchester United and Liverpool most. Manchester United fans, you know, Roy loves United, I love United, Michael loves Manchester City. You know, this is disowning your own club stuff, this.
Chelsea were going to go, Manchester City, and now we have statements from the other 4 English clubs. And the wider football community over recent days, we are withdrawing from the proposed Super League.
What does social media mean to you? For me, I started in 2009. I launched my Twitter, my Facebook, and I've grown my social media platforms to over almost 1 million followers. Now, the video you just watched was about the Super League, the European Super League. It was where 12 of the world's biggest football clubs unveiled a plan to launch what they called the Super League, a closed competition, where they would compete against one another while claiming more of soccer's billions of dollars in revenue for themselves. Now, why I decided to mention that and why it's important is because social media stopped that from happening. Journalists stopped that from happening, and football fans stopped that from happening. And over the years, I've noticed, and I've been part of social media, in particularly in sports, which is my strength and my knowledge. And we've really seen how it's had a big part to play over the past few years. My name is Chris Wheatley. I'm a journalist from the United Kingdom, from London. I'm the chief Arsenal reporter for a website called Football London, one of the biggest websites in the UK. And I've got my dream job. I've been writing about football for over a decade now. It's been fantastic for me, and I've been to many great places, but journalism has really changed over the past few years. And 36% of internet users globally are Premier League football fans. And maybe you are. Maybe you watch the Premier League every weekend. You like football. Maybe you don't like football, but you probably know about it. And one of the biggest things right now is social media's influence and how people are really influenced by the media they consume, by what they see on TV, what they read in newspapers, and what they see in particular on the platforms. There are 3.78 billion social media users, which equates to about 48% of the population. Facebook has over 2.3 billion users. Instagram, 500 million daily stories worldwide. 91% of people access social media via their mobile phones. On average, people spend 2.5 hours a day on social media. What about you? How often do you spend on social media? Maybe you don't spend any time at all on there, but you probably do know someone who does. And I think the biggest question for me right now, and I wrote my thesis on this, is, are you influenced by what you see, what you hear on social media? Because over the past few years, platforms including YouTube and WhatsApp, they have more than 1 billion users each. People have criticized them, and people have suggested that they have a big influence on what we believe and what we say. One of the things that I would like to mention is really to speak online is to publish, and to publish online is to connect with others. And over the past few years, I would say that the media that I've consumed, and as a journalist as well, it's maybe had a negative effect somewhat on what I believe in. I would kind of finish, it's quite a short presentation today, but I would say social media has changed the face of journalism. It will continue to have a major impact on our lives for years to come. And that is how I would end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheatley. We have a couple of questions from our audience. I would like to open this dialogue to you. Should I start with the first?
Yes, please.
As an Arsenal fan, do you believe that your bias towards the club might affect your work negatively?
I think as journalists, we have to maybe take it a step back and be professional. And I wouldn't say I have any particular bias towards football. I think once you work in the industry, in football in particular, maybe you become a bit desensitized to the results, to the performance of the team. You see kind of the inner workings of what goes on. So no, not particularly. I don't have a big issue with that.
Thank you. We have a question from Dr. Livadi. She wants to open up the discussion about British football and how it evolved from hooliganism to the product that they offer today to people and in the stadiums and even internationally.
Yeah, I mean, hooliganism is an interesting topic. I can't say I'm old enough to remember the 1980s and the 1990s where it was particularly rife. There's been movies made about hooliganism in the 80s. There's a movie called Green Street. It's about the West Ham fans. They had a group of fans who were particularly violent and aggressive. They would have fights against other teams. One thing I would say is that has kind of been stamped out of English football. I think why has it been stamped out? I think obviously security advancements. I think there's less emphasis on that kind of violence. There's not that much attraction to violence in football, whereas before maybe there was an attractive element. And I think nowadays, in terms of what we see in hooliganism, we see pitch invaders, we see that a lot, but we don't really see actual fighting at football matches. Not so much in England. In other countries, it's a bit more rife, I would say. But in England, it's certainly been on the decline over the past few years.
One more question. This is more closely related maybe to social media. What's your opinion on fan forums like Arsenal Fan TV? Do they pose a threat or maybe an opportunity for the club and sports journalism respectively?
I think Arsenal Fan TV in particular, when it was established, it was giving a voice to the fans where perhaps they didn't always have that voice. I think we've probably seen more recently that it's been commercialized, so they're more focused on putting advertising revenue, doing partnerships with sponsors, and I think maybe that kind of takes away from that authentic element, which was one of the reasons it initially started. I think it's a good thing that everyone has a voice now. And as I said in the presentation, I think one of the benefits of social media is that anyone can be a journalist, so to speak. Anyone can publish news and publish information. And I think in particular with sports journalism, it's really good that, you know, a blogger, someone like me, can start a website, start a blog, and carve out a career from that. And I think it shows as well that there are opportunities for many people from whatever background. If you have the passion, if you have that kind of desire to cover your team, to write about your team, that eventually you can make a career out of it.
Thank you. Could you please explain your schedule and experience on transfer deadline day?
Yeah, transfer deadline day is one of the busiest days in the football calendar, not just for journalists, for football agents as well. I know there's some agents speaking at the event. One thing I would say is that it's there's never the same day in football. And I think with transfers in particular, it's really exciting. It's adrenaline pumping. Usually I would start my day by calling agents and speaking with people close to players to try and find out what exactly is happening. I think one of the biggest buzzes that you can get as a journalist is when you break a story, whether it's a piece of news, whether it's a transfer, and that's one of the things which I wanted to be a journalist because of. So yeah, in terms of my kind of day on transfer deadline day, lots of calls, lots of messages, and basically just trying to find out which players are going to which clubs. It's really exciting for me. And I think I've noticed really the fans as well over the past, I'd say 5 or so years, there's a real excessive consumption of transfers on social media. Fans want to know where the players are going. They want to know which team they're being linked with. And yeah, I guess I'm kind of part of that carousel, so to speak. But yeah, it's really exciting, and it seems to be getting bigger and bigger every year.
So would this be relevant maybe to the most memorable experience that you gained while working as an Arsenal reporter? What was that? Would you like to share?
I think for me, my most memorable experience was probably the interviews, having the access to big players. Someone like Mesut Ozil, for example, I mentioned him because he is one of the most followed players on social media in the world. I met him, I met Mesut in a coffee shop in London, built the relationship with him. And then eventually I left journalism to start a company with him. So I think that kind of shows you that anything is possible. You can achieve anything if you put your mind to it. And yeah, I'd say that's probably one of my biggest memories. But it's been really interesting. You know, I'm 28 years old, going to the European Championships, the World Cup in Russia. Both of those were amazing opportunities for me. And I think, yeah, anyone who kind of has aspirations of being a journalist, I would say that I think traveling is certainly the best part, and for me, at least, of the job.
Thank you so much. Mr. Wheatley, I think that many of our students and members of our audience watching us right now would be wondering, what are the most important skills that young people need to acquire so that they can succeed in a position like yours?
It's a really good question. I would say that without wanting to say cliches, it is hard work. Because I think without putting in the hours, there were times where maybe I had, like everyone, temptation to go out or to do other things. Whereas I stayed at home working on my website, building up my contacts. Of course, is another thing. I think that's maybe not talked about enough. Like people talk about hard work and talent and stuff like this, but I think getting your foot in the door, finding someone in the industry and building a relationship is one of the most exciting things and also one of the most beneficial things. A lot of people ask me, how do you build contacts? You know, where do you start? But for example, a football agent usually is quite receptive to contact from journalists because they want to get their player's name in the media. I think football agents is certainly a great way to start, but of course you always need a bit of luck. I'd certainly say maybe I've had some luck along the way, but for me, I would just say, you know, hard work, building your network, and just not really giving up, because I think in journalism and in life, people will always close doors on you, but you always have to kind of try and push to find that door that is going to be open. And I think I've done that. There's been rejections as well. I would say that people who do get rejections, like, you know, just don't give up, because the opportunities are always there, as long as you keep working hard. And the final thing I would probably say is find your niche, because everyone wants to write about football, they want to write about sport, you know, the kind of glamorous things. But if you have a niche and you can find something that you're really specialist in, that will help you set apart from the rest. And I think that's certainly something that I would really emphasize.
One of the glamorous things that caught the attention of our audience was the business partnership that you mentioned earlier on with Mesut Ozil. Could you please talk about a little bit more about this? Describe what exactly you discussed, how you met him, and what was the business partnership?
Yeah, so I met Mesut Ozil's agent a couple of years ago. And that's basically how I got close to him, because I wanted to build a relationship. He was an Arsenal player at the time. I did an interview with his agent, helped him promote his book, and then eventually built a relationship with Mesut, whereby I had an idea to start a new company, social media marketing agency. So essentially managing the social media of athletes and businesses. So Mesut was the perfect player to kind of start with, because he has such a huge reach. At that time, he had a number of sponsors like Mercedes-Benz, Beats headphones, and many others. So it was quite a good match. And he also had obviously he had many contacts as well in football, many players. And so that was essentially the business idea. I ended up working as well with quite a few Greek players. I'm actually half Greek myself. So the likes of Socrates Papastathopoulos, Dinos Mavropanos, and many others I ended up working with, and still to this day have great relationships with. So yeah, I think social media for me has kind of actually, I started a business from it. So I was started as a journalist and then went into kind of PR, social media, and then went back to journalism. So it's been an interesting ride. But yeah, I would definitely say that it's been exciting for sure.
So one of the questions, and since you have mentioned that changing from journalism to social media marketing, promotion, and then back to journalism, and discussing about players and footballers' social media, would you have a couple of advices about how athletes could monetize and work on their social media strategy?
Yeah, I mean, regarding athletes, I think the biggest thing for everyone, and I wouldn't just say athlete, for anyone, is reputation. If you have a clean reputation, if you are respected, I think you can do many things. I think the possibilities are endless. But for athletes in particular, because they have such big followings, usually, the biggest ones have millions of social media followers around the world. I think it's so important to make sure that you're posting the right things and that you're showing other things as well in your life, not just the sporting aspect. I think maybe many of you probably follow footballers. They post the same things, their photos after the matches, their photos before the games, training photos. It's quite boring. I think what I would say and what I would suggest to athletes is to show who you are, show your personality. I think a lot of Greek athletes actually do that quite well. I think Giannis, the basketball player in particular, is very good at that. Kostas Tzoumaka as well is another one who shows his personality. I think these are the kind of role models that you want to look up to. And I think it's also good when someone can relate to a footballer, because many of them are earning millions of pounds. They're probably not relatable to the average person on the street. But when they're posting pictures of their dogs, of their family, what they're eating, it makes them a little bit more relatable. So I would say that would be my main advice.
In fact, the concept of authenticity and being able to identify is very premium in the literature as well. Let's discuss some authenticity for you. We have a question like, how does the life of a journalist in England has changed due to the rise of the social media? What's your typical day? How many hours do you dedicate on social media?
Too much. I would say, yeah, average many hours a day. WhatsApp pretty much all day, but I think that's just part of the job, really. I think you have to be switched on if you want to be a journalist. I think, I mean, I'm just covering a football team. There are journalists who, of course, are covering current affairs, news, you could say more important things than football. And I think, you have to be switched on all of the time. Otherwise, you're not suited to being a journalist. That's my view. I think you need to be, you need to be switched on all the time. But yeah, for me, I think over the past few years, I've really, had to work hard on building up my contacts. And I just think it's been a challenging job because in football in particular and in football teams, there's not always many things to write about. Especially, for example, now there's the international break. There's a lot of pressure from different companies. They expect you to write many articles. Sometimes it can be a challenging thing to do, but of course it's an amazing job. Certainly one thing I would say is that, for me, it is a dream job, and I'm delighted to be able to do it.
Interesting. But what about dreams? Don't they come with challenges or difficult moments? We have a question regarding what has been your most difficult moment in your career and how did you manage it? How did you overcome it?
Yeah, really good question. Most difficult moment of my career so far. I think there's been a few. I think as a journalist, if you get information wrong, incorrect, that's pretty bad. That's certainly happened to me before. I think, yeah, publishing something which turns out to be wrong when maybe it was right at the start, that's a terrible feeling. It feels like, yeah, it just feels horrible. You just want to shut yourself away. You don't want to turn on social media, and that's certainly happened to me before. I think one of the kind of perils of having a big following on social media is that it leaves you very open to personal attacks. One thing I didn't mention in the presentation, I know it was a very short presentation, but journalism, abuse of journalists and social media abuse is something which I've certainly encountered, many of my colleagues have encountered as well. I don't think it gets talked about enough. And of course, journalists are not the only people who get abused online, but I think with the job that we're doing in particular, it can sometimes be a bit too much for certain people. So I would say that's certainly one difficult thing that I've encountered over the past few years since I've been a journalist. And yeah, I think the social media platforms certainly need to do more to stamp out that kind of abuse.
This is very interesting. The public scrutiny is, in fact, a very difficult mental and psychological process. Do you have any idea of how players cope with, footballers cope with the same pressure being on the public eye constantly?
Yes, I mean, many of them turn off their notifications. And of course, depending on the app, on the platform, you can turn off your notifications, restrict them to make sure only your followers, or sorry, only the people you're following, you can see their notifications, you can see what they message you. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that more recently, in recent years, that footballers in particular, they've turned off their notifications. They've restricted their messages on Instagram, for example, where only the people you're following can comment. I think that's kind of sad as well. I think it's sad that we live in a society where people, can't be trusted to say positive things, to be nice to one another. But also, I think it's kind of symptomatic of the society that we live in, where people can hide behind their screens and say what they like without any kind of reprimand. So yeah, I think I've noticed that footballers have maybe become more switched off from social media. Obviously, the big platforms like Instagram and more recently TikTok have taken off, but I think a lot of them get tired of that side of things, especially after a bad game. You can get hundreds, thousands of abusive messages if you're an elite athlete, and yeah, I think it's sad, but certainly those platforms are trying to find new ways to combat that kind of abuse.
One last question about the public scrutiny, and we will change the subject. How do you handle the image of politically outspoken athletes?
That's a good question. I'm sure whoever's asked that is maybe referencing Mesut Ozil, because of course Mesut had a very famous picture taken with the president of Turkey, which caused a lot of uproar in his country of Germany, where he was born. I think it's very difficult. Obviously, it depends as well on the politician, on the individual as well. I think they say that sport and politics should never mix, but we've seen recently with the war in Ukraine that it has to mix. Sometimes it just does, and we also see the power of social media and sport in particular, where people can really take a stand against things like the war in Russia, in Ukraine, for example. So yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing to manage, because every player and every individual will have their own beliefs, and they may not always want to listen to your advice. I personally think it's a good thing, like as I said before, to be authentic, to show what you believe in, rather than hiding away. But when those beliefs are perhaps maybe more extreme, I don't have any particular examples, but maybe the question is referencing someone who has more extreme beliefs. I think it's more challenging, and I certainly wouldn't advise for a player to kind of publicize that. But yeah, I think I can reference Mesut in particular. That was a very challenging time for him, where the media in Germany scrutinized him for taking that picture with the president of Turkey. It was a decision which actually saw him lose millions of pounds of sponsorship deals as well. The likes of Mercedes and Beats, that eventually those deals came to an end. And yeah, that's I guess that's a kind of unfortunate side, or the bad side of politics mixing with sport and football in particular.
It is true that there is no fit for all advice here, but the safe path is always more marketable. I would like to change the subject, going back to British football. So could you please explain the importance of the infrastructure upgrades that most of the British football clubs have done to their facilities?
Yeah, I think most of the top Premier League teams in the past decade or so have new training grounds. The likes of Tottenham, Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester United, Manchester City, probably the most notable team, who have built a new training complex that includes facilities for the women's team, for the academy as well. I think that's probably what makes English football stand out from its competitors or from other leagues in Europe. Most people would probably agree with the statement that the Premier League is the best league in the world. English football is the most entertaining league in the world. The biggest thing for that, of course, is money. The Premier League is £1 billion league. And I think teams have reinvested that money. They haven't just spent it on players, they've also reinvested it into their clubs. And I think many positive things have come out of that as well. As I just mentioned, women's teams as well, women's football. I didn't mention it in the presentation, but again, this is something in England in particular, where we're really starting to see the growth of women's football. Now we're seeing the women's teams playing at the actual stadium where the men play, which is a big step. And I think this is something that is really kind of showing the kind of growth, and coming into 2022, where obviously everyone is equal and where we should be playing in the same stadium. So yeah, certainly many examples of that growth. And I think English football, with the technological upgrades, with the training ground upgrades, is certainly progressing at a faster rate because of that.
Since you have mentioned the women's football, we also had one question, and it's now the appropriate time. You said that women's are now playing at the same stadia where men's compete. Would you like to elaborate more on the state of women's football in the UK currently?
Yeah, I mean, there's only a few examples at the moment, but I'm using it as a sign, really. You know, it's showing exactly where it is right now in the UK. I think with women's football, they recently signed a new TV rights deal with Sky Sports, the main broadcaster in the UK. This was a multi-million-pound deal. And most of the money in football at the moment comes from the broadcasters. So the fact is that Sky Sports, the broadcaster, put so much money into buying the rights for women's football, shows, I think, for me personally, shows that there is a lot of hope there for the future. And I think we've, like I said, with the teams playing in the stadiums, Manchester United, for example, I think they have plans to do that at Old Trafford. Arsenal have certainly done that at the Emirates on multiple occasions. I guess the biggest thing now and the biggest challenge is getting women footballers to have the same kind of salary and the same remuneration as their male counterparts. I think that is the next step. That's the next challenge. Of course, as women's football grows, that salary cap or that salary difference will eventually become smaller. You'd like to think. But yeah, I think there's real bench setters or trendsetters in the UK when it comes to women's football, and I'm really hopeful that it will be like that for years to come.
This is very interesting, and I hope that we will see that day sometime in Greece too, with regards to women's and men's football. Going back to Greece, and since you mentioned that you have Greek, you should understand our willingness to know, how do the Greek football players, the ones you mentioned, Mavropanos, Papastathopoulos, Tzoumakas, how do they perform on the British social media?
I think Tzoumakas, and I know Mr. Tountoris is speaking. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow, but I'm sure he'll be able to tell you a lot more. I think with Kostas Tzoumakas, he's an example of a player going from a huge club, Olympiakos, to another huge club in Liverpool. But what we've really seen with him is the power of joining a club in the Premier League. I think he started maybe a few 100,000 followers. He's now on over 1 million followers. I think obviously one of the reasons is he's got an engaging personality. He posts interesting things. But the other thing as well is he plays for Liverpool, a huge team. So yeah, I think the kind of notion of Tzoumakas right now, the Liverpool fans have created a new song for him, which is pretty cool. I think looking back at Socrates when he was at Arsenal, he had a very kind of strong reputation as a hard man. And I think, yeah, like Greek athletes in particular, there's not many playing their trade in England, but I'd hopefully there will be more in the future. And I think certainly that Tzoumakas right now is showing the way for other Greek players in Europe, and showing exactly what can happen if you work hard and put your mind to it.
Great. Mr. Wheatley, one last question. Arsenal is finally back on track in terms of the team's performance. Does this positively improve the results of your journalistic and social media work? I mean, is there some kind of direct correlation between the two performance, athletic performance and then journalism, social media performance?
Yeah, I guess it makes it a bit easier to cover the team when they're playing well. I think it's logical that, when the team is playing well, it's a better mood around the training ground, around the team. You get more access as well. That's just a fact of life. You get more access to the players, to the team. You can speak to the manager more frequently. Whereas if the team are not playing well, you don't get that kind of access. So yeah, it certainly makes my job more easier. It can be more interesting as well when the team are not playing well. There was a period last season where Arsenal were playing very badly in the November-December period. And I had a big exclusive story, which had over 300,000 visitors hit in one day. So I guess that kind of shows that usually negative media can garner a lot of traffic, a lot of hits, but it also shows that there's an appetite for news as well, regardless how the team are playing. So yeah, I think it does make my job slightly easier, but the results change week in, week out, and as a journalist, the most important thing is just be consistent in what you do.
With this question, we have concluded our session. It was a really interesting conversation. It was great having you, Mr. Wheatley. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for being with us during the first day of the Frontrunners in Sports Management 4.0 web conference. We learned a lot today, and we're going to discover even more tomorrow. See you all tomorrow at 1:40 p.m. Greek time. Thank you very much.